to walk through a process for factoring quadratics. The standard form of a quadratic, the A, B, and C, that's a standard form. So I've got 10 steps arranged here, but you're going to run through these quickly in your mind. The more you do this, the easier it gets. But the first thing that you want to do when you begin factoring is arrange the polynomial in either ascending or descending order by power. So that just means highest power on down or the lowest power on up. The second thing you always want to do is remove any greatest common factor if there is one. You're trying to alleviate clutter, you're trying to get to the heart of the polynomial so that you're working with the smallest numbers possible. So factor out a GCF, and then at this point I'm going to go down to the problem to illustrate the rest of the steps. But before I do that, let's talk about the big X up here. The big X is just a way to organize your work so that you can visually see the numbers that you're looking for, and I think that it helps you determine which factors you're wanting to work with along the process. So I'm going to move down the screen and I'm going to illustrate steps 3 through 10 on the polynomial that's chosen at the bottom. So here's my polynomial, and I'm going to identify A, B, and C. A is 3, B is 10, and C is 8. So the first thing I want to do is take the product of A and C. And if you remember from the X, the big X above, the product of A and C, so this is going to be 3 times 8, which is 24. I'll put the 24 in the top of the X, and then the bottom of the X, I'm going to put the B, the coefficient on the linear term. And now I am looking for factors of 24 that sum to 10, meaning that I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 24, and when I add the numbers together, I get 10. So that's going to lead me to 6 and 4. So 6 and 4 are the factors that I'm looking for. I'm going to rewrite the original polynomial, and I'm going to replace 10x with this sum, 6x plus 4x. So I'm now going to rewrite the original. So I have 3x squared, and I'll switch to blue just to make it stand out. So I'm not changing the value of anything. I'm just looking at it in separate, smaller pieces or different pieces so that I can figure out which two binomials will multiply together to create the trinomial. And now I'm going to use factor by grouping. So I'm just simply going to place parentheses around the terms in order, and I'm going to look for the greatest common factor inside each binomial with the green parentheses. So when I look at the first, 3x is the GCF, and that's going to leave behind x plus 2. And then when I look at the second grouping, positive 4 is the GCF, and that's going to leave behind x plus 2. So factor by grouping, I'm going to remove the blue x plus 2 because it's now the GCF, and then the two green GCFs that were factored out, they come together to create the second binomial. And I always encourage you to mentally multiply to make sure that you've got the right answer. And let's see, if I multiply these out, I have 3x squared plus 4x plus 6x's plus 8. And when I combine like terms in the middle, it's going to check to give me the polynomial that I started with. Let's move on and do another example in the notes. And I just wanted you to have a good example with everything worked out step by step. And let's look at a problem like number 4. Let's look at something like number 4. So it's already arranged in order. There's no GCF, and I now get down to analyzing for the big X. The product of A and C, so in this particular problem, A is 1, B is 8, and C is 12. So the product of AC is just simply going to be 12, and the linear term is 8. So I'm looking for factors of 12 that sum to 8. So that's going to give me 6 and 2. I'm going to rewrite the original. I'm going to replace the 8 with 2 plus 6, and I'm now going to use factor by grouping. The GCF in the first grouping is x, leaving me with x plus 2. The GCF in the second grouping is 6, leaving me with x plus 2. So the binomial factors are x plus 6 times x plus 2. Let's run through another one on the video. If I look at a problem like number 5, well, it's not arranged in order, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. And now analyzing for GCF, well, I can definitely see that 5x across the board can be removed from the problem. And when I factor that out, this is what I'm left with. So I'm now going to use the big X method, but I'm just going to use the big X method. I'm only going to focus on what's inside the parentheses, the quadratic in the parentheses. So I can see that A is 1, B is negative 9, and C is positive 20. So the product of A and C is positive 20, and B is negative 9. So I'm looking for factors of 20 that sum to negative 9. So that's going to leave me to negative 5 and negative 4. Their product is positive 20, and their sum is negative 9. So I simply rewrite. And then I use factor by grouping. And I'm going to go ahead and group that negative sign in the second set of parentheses. So when I'm looking at the first, they share x, leaving behind x plus 4. And when I look at the second grouping, I would like to have an x plus 4 binomial remaining, so that means that I need to factor out a negative 5. So if I remove a negative 5, that's going to leave me with positive x minus 4. So just be careful with that. So that means that one of my factors is x minus 4, and then my other factor is going to be x minus 5. And always mentally go back and check just to make sure that you've done it correctly.